Hi, this is Beatrice. I just wanted to do a disclaimer for the following podcast. We talk about the key ideas or ways of thinking of each of the Enneagram types in this podcast. Claudio Naranjo, one of the pioneering Enneagram authors, used to talk about some of the usual or prototypical ways of thinking for each of the types. He used to say that each type has crazy ideas. We're using Naranjo's terminology, these crazy ideas, because we merely want to follow in his tradition in pointing out very clearly that some of the usual ways the types think when just going through everyday life can actually be kind of self-destructive, can actually be a kind of way of going against self-acceptance and healthy ways of being. In doing this, we want to make it really clear that we're in no way meaning anything derogatory about people who have any kind of challenge when it comes to mental health. So we use the term crazy ideas both to follow someone we admire, Naranjo, in the way he talked about them, but also to point out in a clear way that sometimes the typical ways of thinking of each type can actually not make sense. We just wanted to make that clear. So thank you for listening to the podcast. Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Paes.
And today we are talking about the 9 types and their crazy ideas.
Yeah, that's very fun. We have the Enneagram's holy ideas, which are very, very special, spiritual, higher aspects of each type. But we'll talk first about the crazy ideas, which are not high at all.
Right. As you said before, they're not the holy ideas, they're the holy crap ideas.
Or the crazy ideas, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so personality itself is, in a way, a form of craziness, because we are distorting reality quite a lot when we concentrate in thinking of what's happening in one particular way, in just one slice of reality, believing it's the whole, right?
Exactly. And the term crazy ideas is actually a reference to the work of Claudio Naranjo, because he used to say a lot that each type on the mental level has some crazy ideas that we can benefit from noticing and identifying and remembering, because, as you said, the Enneagram shows us that our personality is in some ways a combination of our mental patterns, our emotional patterns, and our instinctive or behavioral patterns. And there's a way that on the mental level, a lot of the types really have these strongly held beliefs about the way the world is, or about the way they are, or about the way they are in the world. And often these beliefs are false and also even a little bit crazy, because they go against the reality of what's really happening. For instance, thinking I'm, completely worthless, or that I have all these big flaws. And often there's a lot of self-criticism that we all have. And sometimes those come directly from ideas or beliefs we have about ourselves that are just not true. But to the extent that we hold on to those beliefs really strongly, and they direct our lives and the way we think about things, and again, then the way we feel about things, they really keep us stuck at a low level of awareness. So it really benefits us to really unearth these ideas and these beliefs that we may hold on to almost as religious convictions, in the way that we adhere to them, so that we can question them and ultimately, hopefully, discard them.
Right. And all 9 types have sets of ideas about themselves, their roles in the world, and the world itself, and also about others. So We're going to talk a bit more, though, about the ideas that, if we examine more closely, are really very silly. Like, if we hear ourselves saying clearly what these ideas are, we will need to see how absurd they are. There are other um, moments that we do work on the other sets of ideas for each type, like when we talk about the fixations, or the other day for in a webinar for our members at cpenneagram.com, we did this webinar about the cognitive bias and the limiting ideas. But today, here on our podcast, we are going to talk about something that makes us technically almost crazy.
Right. So, as a psychotherapist, I sometimes think of these crazy ideas based on a framework from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is an approach to psychotherapy that a lot of people, especially in the West, in the U.S., adhere to, which is, looking at what are the beliefs and assumptions and schemas that people think in terms of, what are the emotions connected to those, and what are the behaviors, and kind of isolating those things and identifying them with more awareness as part of an approach to therapy. In practice, I would say a lot of the cognitive behavioral approach and the practitioners that use it tends to be a little bit more cognitive and less emotional. So I tend to think of it as something that goes a little more toward the cognitive. But I do think there is a kind of wisdom in an approach that really helps us when working with the Enneagram really identify with more and more clarity what our emotional patterns are, what our behavioral patterns are, and especially also, as we'll focus on today, what our mental patterns are. What are the beliefs that tend to guide our actions in the world in ways we see and sometimes in ways we don't see or don't see well enough? So, we're going to be highlighting these key beliefs and ideas that the different types walk around with that often get us in trouble or hold us back or make us operate in the world based on ideas that aren't really based in reality or truth or aren't really what's good for us.
Right. And the reason why these ideas make us operate in the world this way that you say is because it's out of these ideas that we draw our roles in the world. And if you see the roles that each of the nine types undertake for themselves, they are pretty funny, if not tragic.
Yes, and very often these crazy ideas are based in an experience we had early on in life. And children tend to take on too much responsibility when bad things happen to them in early in life. So, in other words, if a caretaker gets mad at you, and by caretaker, I mean your mother or father or
Mother
mother
or
or
father
father figure,
figures, yes.
then kids tend to make it their fault. They tend to see themselves as bad because the last thing a child can be aware of and be okay is my parent doesn't love me or my parent isn't taking care of me. So often, children, it's just part of the way young children operate. They take on a sense of badness or guilt or responsibility for things, for not being good enough, etc. And those experiences in childhood tend to take root as core beliefs about who we are and what's true about us. And I'll never forget one time I heard in the course of my psychotherapy training the idea that one of the causes of depression is believing an untruth about yourself. So there are many ramifications of these crazy ideas, which is why it's really important to get clear on what your crazy ideas are that you're holding on to, even though they're kind of crazy, so that you can work against them. And one of the things you might want to do as you listen to this podcast or you hear these ideas is recognize which ones that you may hold and that may guide your thinking, and then really try to go against them. Uh, Sometimes I have my clients do a practice where they write down sort of the negative ideas and beliefs they have about themselves on one side of the paper, and on the other side, write down the opposite ideas or ideas that they need to start shifting to. So if you hold an idea, for instance, that you're not lovable. So on one side, it would be, I'm not lovable. And the other side, it would be, I'm completely lovable just as I am, and to be able to sort of notice and become more and more aware of that negative idea or the crazy idea, and go more and more toward its opposite, which is usually the truth.
Yeah, and it's a good idea to think of affirmations for yourself as you hear what your crazy ideas are. And you can come up with those yourself just by saying something really opposite to what we are going to share as the crazy ideas. Now, I also think this podcast brings another opportunity that is actually an inner work method, and that is laughing at ourselves, but not exactly at ourselves, but at our ego, at our crazy content. And when you do that, you're sort of separating yourself from that. Who's the one laughing, right? It's one that can detach from that idea, that can observe it, and eventually go against it.
Exactly. It's a way of seeing how some of these ideas are really crazy. And again, they're ideas that the ego holds on to unconsciously. And by seeing them as a crazy and even being able to laugh at them, it's not that you're laughing at yourself. It's not that you're making light of some of the serious ways that these ideas can throw you off track. It's that you're disidentifying from them. It's that you're recognizing these are the ideas that my ego clings to that are not good for me, that I need to start to separate out from and see objectively as a little bit nuts. And so, not necessarily something to keep living my life in service to.
Yeah. So, shall we talk about the 9 crazy ideas now?
Yes, let's do.
So, we always start with 8 and then go clockwise until point 7. So, would you like to start saying what you think is a crazy idea that 8s hold on to?
Yeah, I think that eights tend to hold on to a crazy idea that they are invulnerable, that they can do anything they choose to, in a way that they're superhuman, that they have all the strength in the world, and that nothing can ever hurt them, or that they don't have any limitations, even physical, which can lead to overworking. It can lead to denying their sensitivity and some of their very important and real feelings. And it can lead to being too hard on themselves in terms of what they do in the world and not allowing for a whole other side of themselves that is also real.
Right. Yeah. I was working a few hours ago today with a type 8 woman. And, basically she was using these crazy ideas. She was describing how she had been using these crazy ideas since she was born. So it's like, since she was born, she thought that she was strong enough to take care of her mother, or at 4 years old, she started taking care of her younger brother. And today, she doesn't even feel pain. She can cope with pain, or she takes care of everybody and doesn't feel tired. So, this is all based in the crazy idea that you mentioned.
And there can also be a crazy idea that, the world is hard and you need to be strong to survive, and it's bad to be weak. And I think when eights think that, that's part of the mechanism behind denying any kind of vulnerability, of having this sort of taboo on weakness, which of course isn't true, because all of us are human and we all have weaknesses, and it's a real mark of strength to be able to be in touch with one's weakness and have compassion for yourself around that, and to be able to even speak about points of weakness or vulnerability.
Exactly. And, you know, Nate thinking that the world is hard thinks also that the world is unfair. And then another whole crazy idea comes, which is I know what's fair, right? So I know who's being unfair, who's being wronged. And that's not really the case. Eights believe they think uh, in an unbiased way about that, which is a crazy idea. And also, they think that their role is to control fairness in the world. Isn't this crazy?
Exactly. And there can also be a set of crazy ideas connected to the eighth sense of, no one can tell me what to do. I'm the power in this situation. I don't recognize any power above me. The way I see the world is the way the world is. There can be a sense of my truth is equal to the truth. That kind of goes along with this sense of needing to be very powerful and invulnerable.
Yeah. All very crazy, but just like all other types, because eights are not crazier than any of us. So, should we talk about nines?
Sure, sure. So, what do you think are some of the crazy ideas of type 9?
I think that nines have this idea that they are less important. We
Right.
call it a little bit sometimes as indolence. Part of indolence is that, and I am less important than you. So why will I share my opinion? Why will I say what I want? And eventually, I end up forgetting my own opinion and what I want.
Exactly. It's like nines buy into this idea um, that they don't matter. Or that it's not worth it to try to speak up or to try to express their own opinions, because it's easier to go with the flow, or it's easier just to acknowledge that other people are more important or have better ideas, or should be heard more than they are. And it also leads to them having a belief that they aren't angry, or that nothing bothers them, or that it's not possible to know what they want. Or a lot of times when I hear nines asked, what do you want to do, or what would you like to have for dinner, or what would you like to do in this piece of work, they often say, "Oh, I don't care." Right? So it's almost a belief like, I don't really care about most things, and so anything that happens is okay. Instead of recognizing that they can know what they want. Sometimes it's a challenge, but it's important for them to do that work to get in touch with what they want, to find out what blocks them from that, and to discover a deeper connection with their own sense of being. But all these beliefs about I'm not important, it's not really possible, it's easier to just kind of give up on expressing myself more directly, or getting in touch with my feelings and desires and priorities. Like, that's too hard. It's easier and better to just go with creating more harmony by minimizing myself.
Yeah, it's quite crazy that someone trade happiness for comfort, right?
Yes, exactly. It's
And
better to stay comfortable, might be the craziest idea.
yeah, and another crazy idea for nines is I don't have energy. Like, oh, I won't do it this now for myself, or start this new thing as the originator of movement. I don't have energy. And that's crazy because, as you and I know from students of ours on retreats, especially, nines are, by far the ones with the biggest energy when they manage to concentrate that energy inside them. They just put it all outside and then they feel like they don't have energy. But that's crazy because it's so much energy in actuality that it's almost absurd to say I don't have energy for a nine.
Right. And when you say they put it outside, it's that they disperse their energy through making other people more important, which, of course, there's that crazy idea of other people are more important than I am.
or
It's more,
things or things because they disperse energy in whatever is external demands and requests of any kind.
right. And another crazy idea that I think is very core to type 9 is conflict will lead to separation, and that separation will be inevitable and damaging to my relationships and my sense of being in the world. So it's like a belief that conflict is a bad thing in all circumstances because there's this fear of separation that's often really at the root of the type 9 personality. And recognizing that actually conflict on itself is not always bad. It can be a good thing. It can bring you closer to people when you go through that with them. But it's hard when they've got that really deep belief that anything that smells like conflict is not a good thing.
So, what are some crazy ideas for type 1 in your view, B?
I think a big crazy idea for type 1 is that it's possible, desirable, and achievable to be perfect.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very crazy because it's, the human nature not to be perfect. Now, another crazy idea for once, in my view, is I exist to correct God's mistakes in his plan. Isn't this crazy? Like, you know, reality isn't perfect as it is, and therefore here I come, you know, to correct it.
Right, exactly. And also, it's a crazy idea that I need to be perfect in order to be worthy. I need to expend all my energy trying to improve things all the time, which of course leads to a situation where ones put so much pressure on themselves and drive themselves a little bit crazy trying to achieve the unachievable because on like you said on the human level and the level of personality, um, it's just the truth that we are imperfect, and it's important to accept our imperfections and recognize that putting all that energy into making it perfect is often just a way of driving yourself crazy and not necessarily something that is going to make you happy or is really going to achieve something that in the human realm is possible.
Right. And I believe behind that there is another crazy idea, which is the one thinking that they are the worst of all, the most incorrect of all creatures on earth. Many people don't see that, once hide that to themselves, but this is how they feel inside. So they try to be perfect in the outside a little bit because they think they are extremely imperfect, especially for some subtypes, but all ones have this to an extent. And it's very crazy. It's very improbable that you are the most imperfect of all beings. And also, why compare? It's crazy to compare, or trying to be perfect is also crazy, as you said. Now, um, being harsh on yourself because of that is also crazy. Or being closed to receiving feedback because you criticize yourself a lot and thinking that feedback is always a criticism, and you don't need that because you criticize yourself too much already. It's also a little crazy thinking that everything people say is a criticism.
And I also think ones tend to criticize themselves for normal things like having feelings and impulses. So there can be a crazy idea that is along the lines of, my feelings are inappropriate, or my impulses are inappropriate or wrong, and therefore I should control them and not express them, which leads to a lot of internal tension and stress, and a kind of holding back on feelings and impulses that are, again, just normal and human, and often might even be good to share with other people as a way of being known, and just being honest about who you are, and recognizing that your feelings are valid. It's not about judging them as right or wrong, or appropriate or inappropriate.
Right. So moving on to two, and you are a two. What are some crazy ideas that you try to observe in yourself as a 2B?
Well, I think there is a probably the deepest crazy idea is something like, I am not lovable as I am. I think that's probably at the core. And then it drives the personality to kind of prove lovability or earn love through doing things for others, being likable, being pleasing, turning yourself into someone that you think other people will love, but then, of course, never really feeling like you get there. Because, again, if the guiding crazy idea at the basis of everything is, I can't be loved. I am not lovable as I am. Then it's sort of like, and again, it's like this for all the types. It's like it sends you around in circles, because you're trying to prove your lovability or earn lovability, but it never works, because there's this belief underlying everything that I'm not lovable. And it's almost like when people do love you or do see you and try to love you, it's like you can't let it in. I can't let that in, and it's been so sad to realize that I'm not only afraid of rejection, but I'm afraid of being loved, because it's sort of like the love that comes toward me runs into this brick wall of, I'm not lovable. And I think as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that one important thing to notice about these crazy ideas generally is, in a strange way, even though they're negative and false very often, they operate as a defense. So it's almost like, in a weird way, I'm protecting myself in thinking I'm unlovable. Because what if I try to let love in a really genuine way, and it doesn't come in the way I wanted, or it doesn't, or it's the wrong person or the wrong situation? Not that I'm not lovable, but maybe this person that I'm trying to get to love me just isn't capable of it, or it's not the right thing. I'll take that as proof. And so it's almost like we're trying not to open up to the fact that these crazy ideas are wrong, because in a way it leads us into this risky situation, that what if we find out that they're actually true? So in a weird way, I'm holding on to this belief that I'm unlovable, because I don't want to find out that I'm unlovable. Right? So I think that's at the core of it. But of course, there are several other crazy ideas that we twos walk around with that are, I think, kind of built on top of that core belief. But what do you think?
Wow. Thank you for sharing all this, be humbly. It sounds like these crazy idea can become crazy difficult, crazy hard.
Yes, and I think it leads to a lot of other crazy ideas, like, in order to be loved, I have to support other people. I have to do things for people. I have to turn myself into someone else other than I am, which of course only serves that crazy idea that if I have to be something other than I am to get the love, then that reinforces this idea that as I am, just as I who I am at core is not acceptable.
And the crazy idea connected to this is I know what people need, and I have the solution to what their problems are, right?
Exactly.
And
Or I can make anyone like me. I can
uh,
control the way people feel about me. And that's, again, the personality stepping in and saying, okay, I'm going to take care of this problem. I'm going to manipulate people in the world in order to love me. But of course, that never works.
B, what I think is an even crazier idea, although unconscious, is God is God, but I think God needs a helper here on earth that is really good, me.
Right. Because archetypally, the sin of pride or the passion of pride that drives us twos is the archetypal sin of Satan. And it's this idea that we put ourselves on a higher level than other people, on the level of God, when we think we can make people like us or direct the way things go, or we know what's better for other people than they know for themselves. We need to step in and make things happen, or try to control the way people feel about us. And again, all of that's not true and based on a crazy idea that in order to be connected to other people, we need to shapeshift, we need to earn people's love. We need to do things to make them feel a certain way. When in truth, no one makes anyone else feel any other way. Each person's emotions are their own business and under their own uh, control, not under other people's. So, but we twos, I think, have this belief that we can manage other people's feelings and we can shape the way they feel about us, and we give ourselves more power to do that than we actually have, or that anybody actually has.
Hi. If you're enjoying the depth of knowledge offered in this podcast, you might want to stay in touch with us. Beat and Uranio offer professional Enneagram training, personal development courses, self-guided online courses, and they even have a membership platform with over 100 hours of content. Head to cpenneagram.com/podcast to learn more.
Okay, so threes. What are crazy ideas that you see type threes may have?
Well, type threes are a little bit similar to twos in that they often have beliefs around I need to shift the way I present myself in order to be admired or loved or appreciated or approved of. So I think it's a similar thing of I need to appear competent or have a certain image in order to be loved, which can be a similar kind of core belief of I'm not lovable or admirable as I am, but only through making efforts to earn it. But what would you say is distinct with the type 3 as opposed to type 2?
Well, two things. Threes think that if they are not present or if they stop doing, nothing will happen. And that's simply crazy because when we die, for instance, it doesn't take too long for things to come into place and to keep moving, and everything is there and happening. Or if you take vacations from work, you might find out that there will be a way. People will find a way. I used to work with a three who once said, I don't take vacations because I'm afraid of coming back and seeing that it was not that much needed or important to make things happen, you know. And the other crazy idea associated to that, to me, is the planet spins because of my efforts. Unless I'm doing things, everything stops and nothing happens. And if I'm not present, no way. There is nothing that will happen as it should.
I also think that a big crazy idea for threes is I am equal to my personality or my image or what I do in the world. So you often hear threes having the belief, like, I am what I do. And you can see why they have this because often threes are successful. And let's say what they do in the world is important or is impactful or has earned them a high level of success in the eyes of society or in accordance with conventional ideas about what success is. And so, in a way, it can serve them to have that crazy idea that I am what I do, or I am the image that I have, I'm equal to that, because that gets rewards in society. However, that crazy idea also limits their own experience of who they really are because they're much more than their image or their personality. And they limit themselves to the degree that they think they are their persona or the mask or the role they have in the world. And they don't realize who they really are, which can be very a difficult passage for threes to kind of really get that that is a belief that serves them on the superficial level because it kind of creates a sense of being able to control their image in the world or the way people see them, but really prevents people, including themselves, from seeing themselves as they really are.
Right. And another crazy idea that I see on threes B is thinking they are not emotional. It's crazy because you and I know how emotional threes actually are, and they are all the time being visited by emotions. And it takes a lot of effort for them to push those emotions away because they are essentially emotional. So, also as a head type myself, as a five, whenever I see threes saying they are very mental, I look at them and say, You're not really. You don't really know what being a mental person is. As a mental person, I don't shapeshift this easily. I don't pay attention. Like, I don't feel what others want from me this easily. You're super emotional.
Right. And there can be a lot of rationalizations for not being in touch with emotions, like emotions slow me down, or they're not that important, or they just waste time, or all of those kinds of sort of satellite crazy ideas that support this idea that I don't need to get in touch with my emotions, when really the emotions are the road or the bridge for threes to go to take or to get in touch with who they really are and start disidentifying from their persona or that the image that they think they are but they really aren't.
What about type 4? What is a crazy idea for fours?
Well, I think a really key crazy idea for fours is the belief they often have that's very core that they are somehow deficient or unworthy in a kind of absolute sense. They tend to have this really strong belief in their own inadequacy. And again, I think it operates as a defense in some ways against a kind of hope that that's not true, or in their against sort of learning their own value, which entails risk, right? Because if you have had an early experience of loss or loss of connection that leaves you as a child thinking I did something, there's something wrong with me that caused this disconnection, then it can be hard to open up to the idea that that's not true. But I think a lot of fours have that crazy idea, and then again, a lot of other ideas that rise up to support that main crazy idea.
Right, and this is connected to another crazy idea I had thought for fours, which is thinking that always there is something important missing for me. This means paying attention to what's absent and not what's present. However, the four doesn't always see that is their pattern. They think, no, actually, something important is always missing for me, which is crazy because it's simply not true. If you look closely, all of us have moments that we are simply fine and there isn't anything missing. And we are relaxed and we have right here, right now, everything we need. It's because there is a pattern of thinking of the past with nostalgia or idealizing the future or seeing what you don't have and then comparing with someone else and with an idea of being of melancholy that force get to this impression of something missing. But that's crazy because it's not always like this as they think.
Exactly. And they're no worse or better than any other human. And I liked what Naranjo used to say, that he said this in particular about social fours, but I think to some degree it can speak to this core belief in inadequacy or that there's something missing. He said that fours sometimes make you want to say to them, "What's wrong with you that you think there's something wrong with you?" And again, it really shapes this different dimensions of four in terms of the belief in being special or a belief in being a misfit. So they can see themselves as kind of somehow not fitting into the world of others in this sort of absolute way that can either feed a sense of I'm special, more special than other people, and they don't realize it, or I'm not as good as everyone else. And so I'll never fit in. I'll never be understood and accepted as I am. And this leads to a lot of suffering in fours. But then there can be an attachment to that suffering, again, as a defense against opening up to find out. Maybe you are worthy. Maybe you are lovable just as you are. Maybe you can be understood. But when they hold those beliefs of um, there is something wrong with me, or I'm missing or lacking something essential that I'll never have that other people have, it's like you keep yourself in a stuck position, in a place of not being able to really receive love and other messages from the world that tell you you're very worthy, you're you know incredibly worthy, you are special in your own way, and at the same time equally acceptable and lovable as everyone else.
Yeah. And this all leads to another crazy idea, which is nobody's like me in anything. I'm different in everything. Well, simply not true and crazy because, like, in our DNAs, we're pretty similar. Like, even with chimpanzees, with, it's like 99% similar, our DNA. Also, you know, when you find out you're a four on the Enneagram, you need to face that you're very similar to a whole bunch of other fours who are about 11% of the world's population, like all other types. And also, there is a dimension, even spiritually, that all of us are equal. So it's simply not true that you're different in everything. Maybe you try to make yourself different.
Right. So what about type 5, your type? Tell us what some of your crazy ideas are.
Really? Should I say that? Can we skip it? And
Please,
okay.
please. Oh no, you're just as crazy as everyone else, we know.
I know. It's crazy to not to be on the spot. So, okay. So, one very crazy idea that as a five I have many times is that if I don't save energy, I won't have any. It's unbelievable. I need to, protect my energy, be alone, and do something that I want to do, and not just be subject to other people's demands and requests. And then I feel a relief. Ah, finally I have my time. And that needs to happen every day. It's not just a preference, it's a need, and constantly. But I think that if I do that, I'll recharge my batteries. Well, just up to a certain point. Because what happens is that I keep being concerned with being interrupted, and then I will feel depleted with all of that, and also depleted of the very act of saving energy. And the only true way to not feel tired is just opening myself up to the flow of life and allowing people to get close to me and to do whatever comes my way. So it's crazy to think that I have to save energy all the time.
Yes, it's like a crazy belief in scarcity. And I think when any of us believes in scarcity, it's almost like that keeps us stuck in scarcity and not able to believe in abundance or to take in more. And again, I really hear what you're saying, and that I see fives limit themselves by their belief in their limited ability, let's say, to open up to connection or to connect with their own feelings, and that holds them back in a very real way and keeps them sort of glued to needing to worry about how much energy and resources they have because they always see it as uh, limited or scarce.
Yeah. Another crazy idea for fives like me is everything can be explained, and everything being intellectualized is enough, or the mind solves all problems. Simply untrue.
Yes, an idea.
Just, yeah, just
Yes,
go relate to someone who is emotional. Just start feeling emotions yourself. Just go through, some hard episode in your life, or just open up to all life force and energy to see that you'll be pushed to sense and feel much more than think. So it's very crazy to think that the mind is above anything else.
yes, a belief that knowledge is power and that being rational is somehow better or more important than being emotional, when we need both of those things and one is not superior or better than the other. Fives have the belief that they are limited in their own emotional capacity and limited in their ability to cope with other people's emotions. And again, if you're acting on those beliefs, then reality tends to match up and confirm what your belief is. So a sense of like, I can't really handle other people's emotions leads to an experience of feeling overwhelmed by other people's emotions, which kind of keeps you stuck in that reality instead of realizing, just like every other human, you're capable of being in touch with your emotions and being present with other people's emotions. It may require more effort because you're working against that crazy idea, but it's not achievable.
Yeah. Another crazy idea is that minimalistic approach to life is a good thing, or a wise thing, or wisdom in itself. Like being able to live without, as being some fives take it as wisdom, but it's not. At least for fives, it's like you are um, getting detached in the wrong way, and you are trying to be too self-sufficient and independent because of fear of connection and fear of living a more complete and abundant life. So that's a very dangerous path and belief for fives.
Yes, it's like a belief that minimalism and economy of movement and hoarding are virtues. Not depending on anyone is a virtue, is a good thing, as opposed to something that can cut you off from nourishment.
Yeah. What about sixes? What are crazy ideas for them be?
I think with sixes, they can have some crazy ideas connected to the fact or the perception that the world is a dangerous place, or I need to be constantly on guard to stay safe.
Interesting. Yeah. Another crazy idea for sixes is if something bad hasn't happened yet, it's just a question of time. So it's the
Yes.
certainty that the worst always happens.
Yes, it's this idea of waiting for the other shoe to drop. So the better things get, the more scared they get because the more the bad stuff is coming, as
Isn't
if
it
there's
crazy? Yeah.
always going to be something bad or scary or some problem happening. And again, the more you believe in that, the more you'll find that happening, because we tend to manifest things in line with our crazy ideas, with what we believe to be true. So it's almost like the world becomes more dangerous the more you believe it's that way.
Yeah. Another crazy idea is if I manage to mentally anticipate everything that is going to happen, I will finally feel safe and calm. That's completely crazy because no, you will be more and more anxious by thinking of all hazards and dangers. And also, the world isn't predictable. And as soon as you think you have anticipated everything, things change. So it simply doesn't work. It's not the way to inner peace.
Yes, there's a crazy idea sixes have that if I can imagine the worst case scenario, then I'll prevent it from happening. If I can imagine all the different, things that could possibly play out, somehow I'm controlling reality, or I'm controlling what happens. But again, like you're saying, that mental activity of mapping out every scenario or imagining the worst case all the time only keeps them stuck in anxiety, because they're living in kind of a worst case world inside their heads, and not leaving enough room for what actually happens, or for the opportunities and positive things that can happen every moment.
Yeah, and funny, yeah, and a funny limiting belief and crazy idea for sixes also is the superstition that goes a little bit like this: if I don't think of the worst will happen. It's like thinking of the worst is something I can't stop doing because it's almost like an amulet for me. It's something that is this is what it brings me luck, you know. This is completely crazy, but many sixes relate to this kind of thinking.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Like, and I was thinking of that same word myself, of it's a kind of superstition, that if I'm prepared, I'm somehow managing what happens. And again, we can see how one of the things these crazy ideas have in common for all the types is a kind of magical thinking that I can play God, or I can control reality by the way I think about it, or by the way I act in light of what I believe to be true. But of course, the belief is crazy, and so it leads to a kind of circular craziness, and getting stuck in the illusions of the personality, uh, and not realizing that we need to rise above these ideas to see their craziness.
What about sevens, B? What is a crazy idea that seven has?
Well, speaking of magical thinking and controlling reality with our minds, I think that sevens often have the crazy idea that they can escape all limitation and maintain their freedom through intellectual charm and the way they direct their own thinking and focus.
Interesting. Yeah, another crazy idea for sevens is if I don't look at suffering, it will go away.
Exactly. If I don't if I don't pay attention to the negative data, to my emotional pain, it won't affect me. I won't have to deal with it. I often hear the phrase, and it's funny how you start to hear phrases when you've worked with the Enneagram for a while that you associate with certain types, certain language. And I often hear sevens say, "Oh, I just move on. I just move on from that. I like to move on, or I don't dwell on that." And it's almost this crazy idea that if I don't pay attention to my emotions or my discomfort, I won't have to deal with it. It will just magically disappear, as opposed to the fact that it's part of being human, that we have pain and suffering or discomfort or anxiety, and that not paying attention to it actually makes it stay around longer, or it makes it come up in another way. Like, it's that phrase, what we resist persists. And that if I don't pay attention to that thing that's happening over there, I won't ever have to deal with it.
I was working with the seven, and the person said, "Oh, I, I did a great job with the grief of someone really close to me that I lost, and I'm past that. Fortunately, I have strong beliefs in afterlife and so on, and therefore I'm fine. All I want is to be less anxious. I want to be, I noticed that recently I am even more dependent on jumping from one positive thing from to another." And then I said, "So you think this is not related to not having grieved all the way?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's
Right.
crazy to think that you are not really affected by some of the things that affects all human beings.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And another crazy idea of sevens is life's plan is not as good as my plans. Like what life brings me is sometimes not very wise, and sometimes it brings pain, and that's not very wise. So my plans are better. I plan only for good things. So it's almost like saying God's plan is not as good as mine, which is completely crazy. And if we engage with what life brings us, regardless of being good or bad in our opinion, our very limited opinion, then we will get to our best the fastest. And, there is a wisdom in life's plan for us, but thinking otherwise is very crazy.
Yes, it's like not being open to whatever happens in every moment and always needing to go to the future. It's like I can't allow myself to just take life as it comes, because I need to step in and distract myself, or direct my experience to make it what I want it to be. And I think underlying this is another crazy idea that sevens have, which is something along the lines of, if I allow myself to engage in painful feelings, I will be trapped in them forever, that they'll never end. And I think that's another core crazy idea that keeps the whole seven mechanism working underlying the personality, because they don't allow themselves to have the experience that will in some ways heal and solve the issue, uh, by allowing themselves to engage their painful feelings, whether it's grief or something else, and notice that if they go into those feelings and they learn what those feelings are coming up to tell them, or teach them, that then the feelings go and you don't get trapped in them forever. And so that fear, often a fear they're not very conscious of, that underlies this crazy idea that it's not, it's not really a good thing to engage your pain. And again, there's a lot of rationalizations that are also crazy that come up to bolster that crazy idea, that it's not a good idea to engage your pain, or have the difficult conversation, or allow yourself to sink into whatever emotions bubbling up now, because there's a sense of that I won't be okay, that I will really have a negative experience I won't be able to work myself out of. And unfortunately, that crazy idea creates a lot of anxiety, because when we avoid our feelings, our naturally occurring feelings, that leads to anxiety. You often see the most anxious people are the people who are trying to not be aware of what they're actually really feeling underneath. And if they just turned and faced those feelings and welcomed them, even though, of course, that's scary when you're not used to that, eventually they would move through them and the anxiety would go away. And I think that's one of the things that sevens can benefit from learning, when they really face the crazy ideas and all the rationalizations about why it's not good to feel bad, can lead to. It's time for our top 5.
What is our top 5 today, B?
Our top 5 today is the types that like to travel the most.
Aha. Yeah, I guess we're talking about this because all of us are missing traveling because of COVID. And also because you, Beatrice, are traveling right now for the first time after over a
Over
year.
a year. Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
are you now?
My first trip, I'm in Orlando, Florida.
Okay.
Yes.
Visiting Mickey Mouse?
No, although that would be nice, but I'm attending a training, so
Okay,
that's
good.
exciting. Yeah.
Okay.
So what's your top 5? Your number 5, rather, a person who likes to travel the most.
My number 5 is you, type 2. Although, if I took only you as an exemplar of 2, I would have ranked 2's higher, like maybe a number 1 or 2 or 3. But in average, I think that 2's are among the ones that try to travel more, but not among the main ones. What do you think?
I agree with that. I think often twos, they're people who are good at holding down the home front, and so not always filled with a desire to travel. Although many of my 2 friends do like to travel, and especially if there's a relationship reason to travel of
Right,
some
yeah.
kind. Yeah, I'm thinking of a
Exactly.
friend of mine who has a new boyfriend who lives in Africa, and she lives in California, but I think she just went to Africa again.
Yeah, I remember one time that I was in San Francisco for a conference, an Enneagram conference, many years ago, and a friend of mine went there for the conference for the first time, and it was her first time visiting, and she's a 2. And I was like, let me show her a little bit of San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
And then we went out and with a group of people, also her husband, and I was showing her the places, and I noticed that she was looking at one of us all the time and not looking at things. And she was connecting, like talking with me, and she wasn't seeing what I was showing her in the city, you
Yeah.
know? That
Yeah.
was funny for me as a 5. But anyway,
Yeah.
what is your number 5?
My number 5 is 1-to-1 6, or sexual 6. I
Ah,
find they tend to have an adventurous spirit and like to do interesting things. And I don't necessarily think all 6s are big travelers. They can be, of course. But I thought of that. The rest of mine aren't subtypes, but in my 5 position, I have a subtype, sexual 6.
interesting. 6 is my number 4. I didn't
Ah,
use subtext like apparently you are using. So 6s, I think, like what you said, they are not the biggest travelers because sometimes they hold back and they, may not be as courageous. But I think when they go, they really like it and they force themselves to go and they really appreciate knowing different places and people and things. So 6 is my number 4. I remember how many times in my life I had to push my wife, who's a 6, to traveling, but then she really liked it. So it maybe 6s need a first push, but they do travel a lot at times. What about you? What is your 4?
My number 4 is 2 for
Ah,
similar reasons that you cited. I think they enjoy traveling, being in other cultures, going places. Not the most biggest travelers, but they like it.
interesting. Okay. Would you like to say your number 3?
My number 3 is 5,
Wow. Oh,
and I
so
guess I
I'm
was
I'm
thinking
better
of you.
ranked than you are.
Well, it depends on what better or worse is. There's no real better, worse, right or wrong, Mr. Competitive.
I notice how you react every time I say this.
You were the one who made it a competition, not me.
And you engaged. Yeah.
Of
Okay.
course, yes.
So what prize?
So number 3 is 5, and maybe it's knowing you a little bit. And I think 5s um, like to learn, they like to know things, they like to have experiences and new understandings of different places and cultures. They have a lot of intellectual curiosity, and so I put 5 as in my number 3 spot. What about
Mm.
you?
My number 3 is type 4. I think that there is an adventurous streak for 4s, and they like exploring, they like seeing new things, and they get inspired. I do see in practice so many 4s that travel a lot. Although I must say, for all types that I'm mentioning, I know many people of that type that don't travel and don't have traveling as a priority in their lives, and that includes all 5 types that I selected in my list. But I do think that 4s in general travel more.
Well, my number 2 is type 4. So it looks like we're pretty close on this one. We've got a couple of things
Wow.
just turned around a little bit, but
Yeah, and just a
yeah,
little bit, not much.
yeah. So yeah, type 4s, similar reasons. I think types that I think have big imaginations and like to think about and imagine and idealize all the things they could do. I think sometimes those are travelers because they imagine having an adventure and then, of course, want to get motivated to have one. So I
Mm,
thought of 4s
nice. Yeah.
as big travelers, people who like to have different experiences.
Hmm. Yeah. So do you want to guess what my number 2 is?
5.
Yay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've always been crazy about traveling, although it's been feeling good somehow not to travel that much during this last year. But that's just because it had been a little bit excessive, and I needed a break. But on the other hand, I see not only me, but many 5s traveling a lot. And I think there is a curious reason that I'll disclose. I think that when we travel, we allow ourselves to be the funniest and the more spontaneous and the adventurous us, because traveling has a very clear timeline, and you know when you're not going to be at that place anymore and with those people, so you just allow yourself to be that way. And also curiosity and in observing. There is so much observation to be done when traveling, about everything: places, animals, nature, culture, differences between different places, and language and everything. So it's feast for your mind and for your observation. And you get stimulated also in things like history, geography. But there is that other part of traveling for 5s that is almost as exciting, which is planning for the travel and also, reading all you can about that, or even secretly doing things like I do. Like I go on Google Maps and I have the maps of every place I visited in my life, and then I go back there and remember and so on. Anyway, fives are my second. What about your first?
That was a very long speech about how amazing fives are.
How
What a,
fives love traveling.
what a surprise. Okay.
Yeah.
So my number one, you won't be surprised to hear, is seven.
So is mine.
Yeah, I figured.
I think
Yeah.
this was the closest list we've ever had.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that. I think we've had some that was almost actually the same.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, of course, sevens are the types I think you hear most talking about how much they love to travel and how they like to have different kinds of experiences and how they like to plan for their next trips, a little bit like you said.
Yeah, yeah. And sevens, I know a few sevens that don't travel much. It's not their preference, but most sevens definitely are the biggest travelers. And I know two of them who have created their own um, touristic agency so that they can travel more. I even knew a seven once who said, I don't allow my secretary, he was a CEO of a company, I don't allow her to schedule my flights because I want to see all my options. And I actually like flights that have stops in different places, even if they take longer. Even if I can just watch that place from above or whatever, or sometimes I find a way to do stay for some time in that place of the stop, a stopover. And yeah, so sevens are really stimulated by seeing different places, but many times I see that sevens are very anxious, even in travel, in trips, in a way that they want to go to different places pretty soon, and see a lot in one trip. Yeah, so it's interesting.
I also think because sevens love to have something to look forward to, they almost like the planning and the looking forward to it as much as they do the actual experience.
Yeah. So one interesting thing, B, is that in our top five, both of us, we have all three mental types and we have no body types. And I think this is not a coincidence. First, body types that are a little more territorial, and anchored on the places they are, although that also depends on instinct, like self-pres make them even more so in my view. But mental types are really a lot about traveling.
Yeah, yeah. They travel in their minds
Yeah,
probably and then want to actually follow up
yeah,
and take themselves there
yeah.
completely.
I think it's like very exciting for mentals to travel.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was our top five. And thank you for listening. Join us again for our next Enneagram 2.0 podcast, where we talk about all things Enneagram.